Sergeant Forrest C. Pogue, U.S. Army historian attached to 3rd Army. His frontline interviews capture the human cost and the electric urgency of Patton's reckless dash better than any general's memoir. You do not outrun your fuel. That is a rule every staff officer learns before he ever sees a battlefield. Tanks do not advance on courage. They advance on gasoline, on ammunition crates, on bread, on spare track links, on tires and engines, and repair parts. Every mile you drive forward stretches a fragile core behind you, roads, bridges, convoys, until one clean cut snaps the whole thing. For decades, the German army builds its defensive doctrine around that truth. If an enemy pushes too fast, you let him. You step back. You keep your formations intact. And then, when a spearhead runs dry, when a supply line turns thin as string, you strike the string with a knife. The Wehrmacht generals from France to the Eastern Front believe the same thing. Speed without logistics is not brilliance. It is a mistake you can punish. And in the summer of 1944, they watched one American commander make those mistakes again and again. Thrust too far, columns too fast, a front too wide, fuel burn like it doesn't matter. They laugh. They criticize. They prepare to trap him. But in 1944, one man turns that rule into a weapon by breaking it so violently the enemy cannot recover. And you are about to feel what it's like when reckless speed becomes a form of control. It is late August 1944. France is cracking open. Paris is about to be liberated. The German army in the West is bleeding, disorganized, and retreating, yet still dangerous, because a retreating army can still kill you in enormous numbers if it manages to form a line and breathe. And now you're moving with 3rd Army, George S. Patton's army, an organization that feels less like a conventional force and more like an engine held at redline. Your job, your strange, half-civilian, half-soldier job, is to record it. You are Sergeant Forrest C. Pogue, attached to the Army's historical section. You are not a rifleman by trade, but you live among them. You ride in dusty jeeps, sleep in ditches, listen to officers argue over maps by flashlight, and then you find the men who did the fighting, and you ask them quietly what happened. And what you keep hearing is the same idea, spoken in 100 different voices. We didn't know where we were going until we were already there. Patton is in his late 50s, a cavalryman by soul and a mechanized commander by necessity. He believes in momentum the way other men believe in prayers. He curses, he demands, he pushes, and he measures war in miles per day. His staff officers know he can be impossible, but they also know something else. Patton can smell paralysis. He senses the one thing the Germans need more than anything. Time. Time to regroup. Time to pull stragglers into units. Time to bring artillery forward. Time to mine roads and wire hedgerows and register defensive fire. Time to choose ground. And so the strategic moment matters more than the tidy textbook rule. If the Germans ever stabilize, if they ever build a continuous line across northeastern France, then you trade chase for siege. You trade movement for attrition. You trade weeks for months. Patton refuses that trade. He does it with what looks, on paper, like insanity. He drives 3rd Army forward so fast that his supply system begins to tear. Gasoline becomes a daily crisis. Ammunition piles lag behind. Vehicles break. Men fight on rations that arrive late, if they arrive at all. Orthodoxy calls a flaw. But you, moving with these columns, can sense something that orthodoxy cannot measure. The Germans are not preparing a trap. They are trying to stand up while someone keeps kicking their knees. And now Patton faces a challenge that should end him. He is pushing into a widening gap toward rivers and fortresses and crossroads, with a supply line stretched across Normandy like a wire pulled too tight. If the Germans find a moment to cut it, 3rd Army could stall, surrounded by distance and empty fuel cans. So what does Patton do? He pushes harder. You wait before dawn to the sound of engines coughing in the dark. Not one engine. Hundreds. In the road haze, you smell exhaust, hot oil, and that faint, sweet edge of gasoline. That means someone spilled fuel while filling a jerrycan in a hurry. Men talk in clipped voices. Drivers slap hoods. Officers bend over maps on the fender of a Jeep, tracing routes with a finger that won't stop shaking. Part fatigue, part adrenaline. This is not a normal advance. This is a pursuit. And the first thing you learn in a pursuit is that the enemy is always just ahead of you, close enough that you can almost touch him, far enough that he might vanish around the next bend. Patton orders his corps to drive east, northeast, wherever there is open road, and a German unit that has not yet been given time to turn into a wall. The movement is messy. It is loud. It is dangerous. Because the faster you go, the more you break your own rules. A tank battalion should not travel without infantry close. A column should not stretch for miles without flank security. A commander should not bet an entire army's tempo on fuel trucks that may not arrive. But Patton keeps betting, and the Germans keep losing the chance to punish him. Because punishment requires preparation, and Patton's speed denies preparation. You ride past burned-out German vehicles, still smoking from yesterday. You see abandoned wagons, dead horses, piles of equipment thrown into ditches because no one had time to load them. You see German prisoners with dust-caked faces, eyes hollow, hands raised not in fear, but in exhaustion. At a crossroads, an American lieutenant shouts at a convoy to keep moving. A truck driver yells back, "We're out," meaning fuel, meaning luck, meaning patience. Somewhere behind you, a pipeline and railheads and depots try to catch up. Somewhere behind you, staff officers are begging for gasoline allocations like they're bargaining for blood. And Patton hears all of it, and answers with a command that sounds like madness. Keep going. You begin to notice the pattern of his mistakes. He overextends, yes, but he overextends everywhere, forcing German commanders to guess where the real threat is. He drives deep, yes, but he drives deep before the Germans can choose the ground, forcing them to fight in motion. He accepts supply risk, yes, but he accepts it in exchange for something the German army cannot replace: command coherence. Now the pursuit tightens. The next prize is not just distance. It is the Moselle River in the city of Metz, ground that Germans know, ground that can become a fortress. If they can anchor on rivers and fortifications, they can finally stop running. Patton wants to cross before they can lock the doors. And this is where the impossible action begins, because you can feel the army's throat go dry. Fuel is short, not tight, short. You hear it everywhere. We're down to fumes. We've got one more day. We got enough to fight, but not enough to move. And if you cannot move, the chase ends. The Germans breathe. The line forms. So Patton does what looks like an error bordering on negligence. He orders advances that consume fuel even when fuel is scarce, because he understands something brutally simple. A stalled army is a dead army. You ride with men who have been awake for 2 days, their eyes gritty, their uniforms stiff with sweat and dust. They chew gum like it's food. They drink lukewarm water from canteens that taste like metal. Their hands shake when they light cigarettes. Then the order comes down. Seize crossings, seize bridges, seize any foothold east of Moselle. You hear the names, units, towns, grid coordinates, spoken as if they are normal. But nothing about this feels normal. A battalion commander looks at his map, and then looks at his fuel gauge like he's watching a heart monitor. He knows the math. If his tanks drive 10 more miles, they may not drive again. But he drives anyway. You move into the kind of fight that makes historians stop being observers. Artillery booms somewhere ahead. Deep, throaty concussions that you feel in your chest before you hear them. Small arms crackle. The air tastes like dust and cordite. Somewhere, a tank main gun fires with flat, violent slap that echoes off trees and buildings. And through it all, the clock runs. Because the Germans are not asleep. They are reacting. You begin to catch glimpses of the enemy's perspective. Fragments from prisoners, intercepted chatter, the sudden appearance of units that should not be here yet. German commanders are not building a neat defensive belt. They are throwing doors shut as Patton's men sprint through the hallways. A German rearguard forms at a village. Patton's let elements hit it before it finishes digging. The Germans fire, hold for minutes, then retreat again. Another rearguard forms at a river approach. Patton's armor arrives before the demolitions are complete. The Germans blow what they can, fall back, leave the rest. This is a hidden genius. By moving too fast, Patton forces the Germans into a perpetual series of half-decisions. And half-decisions get men killed. Now, think about what it means to command on the receiving end of that. You are a German general. Your maps are outdated within hours. Your units are intermingled. Your communications are strained. Your fuel is low too, and your air cover is thin. You need to pick one place to stand. And every time you start to stand, Patton is already bypassing you. So you do the only thing you can do. You chase a shadow. The most dangerous moment arrives when Patton's spearheads run up against reality. Gasoline does not appear because you want it. There are days in early September when Third Army's forward units all but stop, when the pursuit threatens to collapse under its own velocity. Trucks are empty. Tanks sit silent. Men stare at the road as if staring can summon convoys from the horizon. This is where failure feels certain. If the Germans strike now, If they counterattack into those stretched routes, if they cut a few key roads, Patton's forward elements will become isolated pockets, stranded without fuel, waiting to be crushed. And German commanders see the opportunity. They begin to concentrate. They begin to stiffen around Metz, around the Moselle, around ground that invites defense. For the first time in weeks, the Germans stop looking like a mob in retreat and start looking like an army. The air feels heavier. The pauses in movement feel like holding your breath underwater. You can almost hear the German staff officers saying, now we punish the mistake. And Patton, who should by every textbook slow down and consolidate, does something that turns your stomach with audacity. He shifts priorities, scrounges fuel, and re-aims his limited momentum like a knife. Instead of one clean, predictable push, he drives a series of rapid thrusts, feints, probes, sudden changes of direction, so that the Germans cannot know which crisis is real until it's too late. A German unit rushes to block a crossing. Patton's men hit another crossing. A German reserve moves toward one threatened sector. Patton's armor appears in a different sector. A German commander plans a counterstroke. Patton's lead elements have already passed the point where the counterstroke mattered. You begin to understand that his mistakes are not random. They are a deliberate denial of rest. And denial of rest is a weapon. Now the countdown. You ride with a column approaching a key road junction, one of those places that doesn't look important until you understand what it controls. Every mile closer tightens the tension like wire. 5 miles. The road narrows between hedgerows. For miles, a burned truck lies on its side, still warm. 3 miles. You hear sporadic rifle fire ahead, sharp, impatient. 2 miles. The column compresses, vehicles bumper to bumper, men peering over shoulders. 1 mile. A tank commander stands half out his hatch, binoculars up, jaw clenched. And then the con hits. Machine gun fire rips across the road, snapping into dirt and metal with a sound like tearing cloth. Someone shouts. Tires squeal. A truck lurches into a ditch. Men spill into the roadside, their boots sliding in dust, their hands moving faster than their thoughts. You taste fear, not a metaphor. The mouth goes dry. The tongue feels too big. Your heartbeat becomes a drum that drowns out everything else. An American officer screams to flank the position. Another yells for a tank to fire. The tank gun barks. The recoil shudders through steel. The shell slams into a building ahead, and the wall collapses in a roar of brick and splintered wood. Smoke rolls across the road. It stinks of plaster and burning oil. The Germans fall back, again, because they never got time to become a fortress. They only became a speed bump, and that is Patton's pattern, repeated across hundreds of miles. Every time the Germans try to stand, he arrives before their feet find the ground. Midway through this rolling chaos, after you've watched yet another German position crack, not because it was weak, but because it was incomplete, you realize the truth. Patton isn't racing toward Germany. He's racing against German organization. And right here, right after that realization, comes a moment to pause, to breathe, to understand what you're witnessing. If you find this kind of untold military detail as fascinating as we do, we'd be honored if you'd hit that subscribe button. We believe these stories of courage and genius deserve to be told. And by subscribing, you help us ensure they aren't forgotten. Now the fight changes character. The easy days of pursuit begin to die. The Germans are learning, painfully, slowly, but learning. They begin to anchor around fortified ground like Metz. They begin to use rivers as brakes. They begin to trade space for time with more discipline. And Patton's mistake becomes more visible to critics. His supply line strains. His units are tired. His front is wide. Higher headquarters worries. Logistics officers grimace. Even friendly analysts begin to say the same thing. He's gone too far, too fast. But the Germans, if you could sit in their headquarters, are saying something else entirely. They are saying, we cannot predict him. They are saying, we cannot rest. They are saying, he forces us to move when we need to dig. And that is the true terror of speed. It is not about distance. It is about decision cycles. Patton keeps forcing German commanders to decide under pressure, with partial information, with exhausted troops, until correct decisions become impossible. You watch it up close in the men. You interview tank crews whose hands are black with grease, and whose faces are burned by sun and wind. You hear infantrymen talk about riding tanks for hours and then dismounting into fire without knowing the name of the town they're taking. You hear medics describe treating casualties in barns and roadside ditches, because aid stations cannot keep up. The human cost is real. Patton's tempo punishes his own men. But it punishes the Germans more, because the Germans do not merely retreat. They unravel. Still, there's a moment, one sharp, sickening moment, when you think the unraveling will reverse. A German counterattack forms. You can sense it before you see it. The artillery grows heavier, more coordinated. The small unit resistance becomes stubborn. Prisoners stop looking like stragglers and start looking like soldiers with orders. A report comes in, German armor moving. Suddenly, Patton's forward units look like a runner who has sprinted too far from his water. Engines idle. Fuel gauges sit near empty. Ammunition trucks are not where they should be. Infantry is scattered along roads and villages, trying to cover flanks that stretch too wide. This is where the textbook trap should close. But the trap needs timing, and the Germans, conditioned by weeks of reacting, cannot synchronize fast enough. Their counterattack hits pockets instead of a clean, decisive cut. It forces local crises, deadly ones, but it does not sever the artery. Patton's commanders shift. They plug holes with whatever they have. Tank destroyers in ambush, artillery firing until barrels glow, infantry digging in with entrenching tools that clang against stone. In that chaos, Patton's earlier mistakes reveal their other side. Because when you advance fast enough or long enough, you do not just take ground. You take the enemy's schedule. And by the time the Germans try to impose their own schedule again, they are already late. Zoom out now, out of the dust and the hedgerows and the frantic fuel calculations, and you see what Patton's tempo truly does. What they didn't know in Allied headquarters, what even some of Patton's critics missed in the moment, was that the apparent recklessness created a strategic prison for German commanders. A German army in retreat normally chooses where it will stop. It chooses a river line. It chooses a fortified city. It chooses high ground. It concentrates artillery. It mines approaches. It organizes reserves for counterattacks. Patton's speed steals those choices. Instead of one coherent defensive line, the Germans are forced into a patchwork of emergency stands. Instead of building depth, they build panic. Instead of preparing set-piece defenses, they fight meeting engagements they did not plan. And that changes everything for the Western Front. Because every day the Germans spend reacting to Patton is a day they cannot spend creating a stable front that would drain Allied strength through the autumn and winter. It also forces German high command into constant reallocation, moving units not where they want them, but where the crisis is right now. And when you move units under pressure, you burn fuel, you clog roads, you lose equipment, and you lose cohesion. The true impact wouldn't be fully understood until later, when German generals look back and try to explain why so many reasonable defensive plans never materialized. They saw it then. Patton's errors were not errors in the usual sense. They were a sustained offensive rhythm that kept the German army in the West in a permanent state of interruption. And interruption is fatal in war. Even when Third Army finally grinds against the fortified reality around Metz and Moselle, when logistics and German resistance slow the dash, the earlier weeks have already carved their mark into the campaign. Patton's acceleration forces the Germans to spend irreplaceable strength simply trying to become stable again. And by the time stability returns, if it returns, the Allies are closer, stronger, and better positioned than they would have been if Patton had advanced properly. Now come back down to the human level. Back to the men whose names do not appear in grand strategy charts. You remember the faces. The tank driver with dust caked in the corners of his eyes. The infantry sergeant whose hands shake from exhaustion as he lights a cigarette. The medic whose sleeves are stiff with dry blood. The truck driver who kept rolling forward on a prayer and a nearly empty tank. And you remember your own role, Sergeant 4C. Pogue, moving among them with a notebook and questions, trying to capture what it felt like to live inside Patton's tempo. Because you understand that speed in war is not an abstraction. Speed is fewer hours of sleep. Speed is engines run too hard. Speed is convoys that drive through darkness. Speed is a man bleeding in the back of a truck because the aid station is still 50 miles behind. Speed is a platoon arriving at a village before the enemy can mind the road, and paying for it in casualties anyway. Patton's legacy is complicated because his genius carried a cost. It demanded endurance. It demanded risk. It demanded that ordinary soldiers bear extraordinary strain. But here is what the Germans realized too late. Those mistakes, the overreach, the relentless advance, the refusal to slow down, were not simply recklessness. They were a way of forcing the enemy to live inside fear and uncertainty day after day, until German commanders could no longer plan, only respond. And that matters now, because history is full of false lessons, tidy rules that feel safe until someone breaks them with intention. To this day, When militaries talk about tempo, decision cycles, and keeping opponent off balance, they are circling the same truth Patton proved in 1944. Sometimes the line between error and genius is not competence. It is whether your enemy understands what you are doing before it's too late. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Every click tells the algorithm this piece of history is worth remembering. We're dedicated to rescuing these forgotten stories from the archives. If you want to join us on this mission, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment with your city or state, and tell us if someone in your family served. Thank you for ensuring that Sergeant Forrest C. Pogue and the thousands of men who rode with 3rd Army do not disappear into silence. They deserve to be remembered.